Father Ledwith, thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Can you elaborate more about the relationship between religion and diseases of the mind?
Well, I think our mind, whether we're dealing with politics or economics or history or art, whatever, or religion, has certain traits built into it that I would term diseases because they're not the way the mind should function. And because of that, our quality of life is lessened, and we tend to run ourselves into blind alleys and all sorts of problems which would be better avoided. And indeed, the schools of wisdom in history were always fighting against those same diseases, even though they may have had different names. And
the ancient schools
the
of
ancient
wisdom.
schools of wisdom.
When you say ancient, you mean something very old.
Well, they're ancient, I suppose, because they're things that we hear about in fables, and obviously they were secret, because a lot of what they were teaching was not acceptable to the powers that be or the status quo.
Now, they weren't acceptable because they were dealing with diseases of the mind that kept the status quo going.
Yes, they were dealing with diseases of the mind that kept people subservient, that kept people feeling inferior, that kept people feeling abandoned and impoverished and unpowerful. In other words, dependent on others. And it's obviously far easier to keep a society in order on a superficial level if people are in that frame of mind.
Now, when you say keeping people subservient, that implies that somebody is keeping this society subservient. And yet when you talk about diseases of the mind, because I've heard your very long lecture and we don't really have time to go into all the fine details that get you to this conclusion, but what are some of the diseases of the mind that would allow some people to take power and others to give it up?
Yeah, it's very easy for this to happen because there's always a large number of people who want to give their power away, who want to be taken care of, who do not want to accept ultimate responsibility for their lives, who believe there is somebody up there like a huge parent in the sky who will guarantee that everything is okay.
This is a childish understanding of God.
The vast majority of people today in the world are of that mentality. So that in itself is a disease or a deviance.
So as long as they suffer from that disease, they're going to have a religion accommodate them?
Well, they can have whatever they like accommodate them. They may have a politics that will accommodate them, because obviously if you're subservient in your mentality, you want somebody who will come in and fill that vacancy, whether it's God in religious terms or whether it's a political leader or a dictator or a guru or whatever. You just want someone up there who's going to take care of you and who's going to make sure that everything is all right.
What would you like to see religion do? I mean, what is it not doing now, and what could it be doing, or would it be renamed?
Well, if we look at
else?
what I call these, I named 4 or 5 diseases of the mind. One of them is that we believe we're the center of everything. You know, if I meet someone on the street, a total stranger, someday, and he accuses me, as I said in my talk, of being a green alien from Alpha Centauri, well, I don't feel offended. I just pity that individual and hope he's taken care of. But if I meet that same total stranger on the street and he says to me, "You're fat and lazy and stupid," I'm hurt by that. Why is that? What's the difference between the two situations?
We're a little guilty?
Yes, I don't realize that person's statement is really to do with them and their issues about being fat and lazy and stupid. It's nothing to do with me. But we tend to take everything personally. And we've been told that since the days we were in our childhood, in our family, in our education, that we are the center of everything. Everything revolves around me and the hub of the universe. And therefore I'm very vulnerable, because anything anybody chooses to say to me, I take it extremely personally, and therefore I'm hurt and I'm knocked off my rails or whatever.
So this disease is self-importance?
It's self-importance, yes, that I am the be-all and the end-all of everything. Then there's another disease, which is paradoxically almost the opposite of that, which is that I want to be taken care of, that I don't have power to take care of myself. In other words, self-importance is balanced by utter self-abnegation, utter powerlessness, victimization, and I feel I need somebody outside to come in and assure me and fill up for my inadequacies. Now, the whole reason why we are here in this earth at all is to evolve and to become powerful spiritually, because we have come down through 7 levels of reality to where we now are, and we have got to go back up through those 7 levels with the wisdom of the experience of each of them. If we do not take back our own control of our life, in other words, getting away from victimization and getting away from self-importance and all the other diseases that flow from them, we will never do that. And unfortunately, because of these tendencies that are in all human minds today, every movement of enlightenment, every philosophy, every religion tends to cater to that victimization. It tends to come in to fill the lack that people feel, to assure them there is an all-over abiding presence that will take care of them and look after them, whether that's Jesus or whether that's God or whether it's the Buddha or Muhammad or any of the other figures of religious history. And unfortunately, in pandering to that desire in human consciousness, in the human psyche, religion really is assuring that we will never reach our destiny, because until we do take back our own power, and until we do realize that everything I do in my life, I myself have brought it there. That's the most basic step that there is in evolving, and that is basically what religion prevents us doing. So religion, tragically, without realizing it, and I know it's done in good faith, is in effect preventing the very thing happening which it maintains its heretofore.
Now, great masters like Jesus and Buddha and others that you mentioned, they knew this truth.
Oh yes, absolutely.
They undoubtedly never intended to start a religion to do what you're saying happens, where people remain victims and give their power over. Why do you suppose these great examples were not able to keep this knowledge lively?
Because I think it nearly always requires the presence of a great person who's beyond the clutches of these human tendencies and diseases of the mind that we have. And when they're gone, the witness that's written down about them or that's handed on in oral tradition, tends to reshape their message until it accommodates more and more to the average mind.
Which has the diseases.
Which has those diseases. So that the message that one of these great teachers has left behind very quickly becomes something less than what they did.
Now, would you say Jesus, coming as a man, still had to grapple with these same diseases? Was he a human?
Oh, absolutely.
He was a human being.
The Church has always emphatically taught that he was fully a man. And if he were not fully God and fully man, the incarnation would not have occurred. There's always a tendency to shortchange Jesus, to take one aspect of him and forget the rest, or take a different aspect and ignore the others.
You mean take the divine aspect and say he never had to grapple with what we human beings do?
Take the human, take the revolutionary Jesus, take the gentle Jesus, meek and mild, take the Jesus that called Herod a fox and that the Pharisees were a brood of vipers, the worst insult you could ever level at a Jew of that time. Mm-hmm. There are many aspects to Jesus, and we tend to mold Jesus to our own personality. And you find at a certain stage in your life, perhaps, that your God has become an enlarged version of yourself.
And you're not changing. You're changing your God.
You're changing your God. You're not changing yourself at all. And unfortunately, that's one of the things that religion is not addressing.
So in other words, an ancient school of wisdom, by saying that we are gods within who have descended through 7 levels of creation, gives the knowledge that if we're willing to change, we can have the life that we want.
Yes.
But if we don't want to change, we can keep complaining or keep holding on or making even greater these religions.
Or keep putting all our trust in some great figure who will act as our savior.
Which you say is destined to failure.
It's destined to ensure that we never evolve.
I mean, that's a very strong That's a very strong statement, especially for a Catholic priest to be making, that religion is destined to ensure that people do not evolve.
Well, it's not destined to do it, but the way religions are being expressed today does do that. It need not be that way. And my great hope would be that the religions would see more clearly what they're here for and make the shift that's necessary. Now, it will be an enormous shift because many of the people who administer the religions are not really conscious of these deep realities that are behind the process. And they have to realize that they must come more back to what their sources talked about. For instance, say the 7 Sacraments in Catholicism were rites of initiation, which Jesus used. They have a very profound meaning, but the way in which they're practiced today, bears almost no resemblance to what they originally were, and also has very little of the empowering effect that they originally had. So it's as if we have a whole structure here which is in essence true, but which has lost its power to achieve what they were originally meant to achieve.
What does an initiation mean?
An initiation is something, a sort of little pericope or section of life in which someone puts you through an experience which you can then expand to help you with the whole of life. For instance, baptism. Take that as the first sacrament. The purpose of baptism originally was based on the primitive belief that the fundamental material from which everything was made was water. And then if you wanted to change and become something different, that you had to be reabsorbed into the original substance, water, and then rise up
Renewed.
a new being. So this was the culmination of a great deal of preparation and a great deal of teaching. And then this was the great symbolic act in which it was all brought together. So that's where, say, when we say in the Mass, in baptism, we die with Christ, it might seem a very strange thing to be saying, but we are actually dying symbolically and coming out a new person. So those rites, the Eucharist, and all the 7 sacraments that you care to mention, all had a really profound meaning in the beginning, which was designed to help the spiritual evolution of the human person. But nowadays, religion, by and large, except for the fundamentalist extremes, has tended to become a humanitarian organization because they have nothing to say about the transcendent that's credible to a modern person. I mean, I always remember the statement of the great French philosopher Maurice Blondel, who said, "It's no longer my intellect that causes me to have trouble with what the church teaches, it's my taste." And the great offender in that, I think, was beliefs about the transcendent or the beyond. Because let's face it, the images of heaven, hell, purgatory, and limbo that are current in the pulpits are images that no self-respecting person could espouse today.
Right, but self-respecting people do know science says we use a small part of our brain.
Yes, that's true.
So if you can unfold it, someone with more brain potential turned on would start to see these deeper meanings in the sacraments that you said were originally rites of initiation to help this, to facilitate the process of turning on.
Well, the message of Jesus has been tailored down to suit our own tastes, accommodated to our own abilities and our own desires, so that it's comfortable with me, like an old shoe. It never makes any pressure on me, or I never feel the pinch. Therefore, I never evolve. I just sanctify what I am.
Right, but you'll never have miracles in your life.
You'll never have a miracle, you'll never have anything like that. Likewise, the sacraments, as I said, are immensely powerful, and the message of Jesus in its original form is immensely powerful. But the ways in which that's being put across today are very defective, and people know that. They feel that. They're voting with their feet. They're leaving. They're staying quiet. And even the religion that's left there, say about heaven, hell, and purgatory, people are embarrassed to speak about these things anymore, so you find that the pulpits have gone silent about the transcendent, and Christianity has largely become a humanitarian organization concerned with this life, the love of the neighbor and all that, which is wonderful. But that's only part and the minor part of the message. So that's why I say that religion today, if it is going to do what it is meant to be here doing, has to make a radical change. Do I think that religions will make that radical change? Unfortunately, I do not think they will make that change. but they could make the change, and they could provide people with an enormous ability to evolve. The ancient schools of wisdom had that grasp of things. They were secret because, generally speaking, the people around them didn't welcome the giving back of power to individuals and taking back their own right to shape their lives. Because one of the basic things that had to be accepted was that we create our own reality, and that everything that is in my life, however pleasant or unpleasant it may be, I myself brought it there. That's the very depths of the dark night of the soul when you realize that that's the case, but it's also the first step in wisdom and evolution. And that is not being put across today. When we do accept that, and when we do try to take back, in the cliche, our own power, then very strange things very often start to happen in our lives, and the miracle, or what's called miracle, becomes common, not unusual.
Now, miracles we know from certain masters, particularly in India, of making a holy ash that can heal people, or remarkable healings that some individuals have the power to give. All of these things point to something extraordinary. But I would say the most fascinating miracle is that we don't even have to die. And I've heard you say that Jesus really came here. Why?
The reason why Jesus came here was to attack the fundamental fear which was undermining all of our evolution. And fear is our biggest obstacle. And all human fears are ultimately rooted in the fear of death. Jesus came to confront death and to show that even if your physical body died, that it was possible to resurrect it through the power of your spirit. And therefore, of course, it's much easier not to die at all. And the Gospels and the New Testament, rather, say that as well. In the 5th chapter of the Epistle to the Romans, St. Paul wrote that it was through one man that sin came into the world, and it was through sin that death came. In other words, death was not original to this life. It's not natural. But of course, our propensities for victimization and all those diseases of the mind, and the extent to which we capitulate to those diseases time after time after time, ensures that the body does decay and the body does die. Now, some people may say this is all cloud cuckoo land and all that, but we're becoming much more open now to the power of the mind. And I'm not talking about positive thinking here, because positive thinking is just smearing a tiny little coating of positive thinking over a mass of negative thinking. I'm talking about an absolutely full acceptance by the person that this is the case. That's not positive thinking. It's a total shift of attitude. But that if that is accomplished, that then the human body responds to the mind, and it need not necessarily decay and degenerate or age. But also, what has become the case with religion is that we have become creatures of this lowest plane, the 7th lowest plane down here, the 1st plane or the 7th, depending on the way you count. And what I suppose we know from science is that the material realm is held in place by energy fields. And if we can access those energy fields that are in the higher realms, then things happen that are regarded as extraordinary or miraculous. They are not in fact miraculous. They're simply reality. But we've confined ourselves in the basement of reality instead of going into the upper floors of the dwelling at the same time. And when we go to the upper floors of the dwelling, reality responds to the mind and responds to our intent in ways that are unusual. And because they're unusual, they're labeled miracles. All the great people of history that we look up to, that are saints or that are wonder workers or so forth, knew that their consciousness had got above the material realm, and they knew how healing was done, not in the physical body, but in the energies of bodies above it that control the physical. So if you want to institute a healing in the physical body, it has to first be done in the energy body above that sustains the physical. In other words, there are really no miracles. Miracles are done by people who are in touch with the true nature of reality. And a person who takes back their own responsibility for their life and who tries to follow out the example that was taught by Jesus and many great other religious teachers begin to understand that. And then they're on their path back to the source, for which is the reason we came here.
Yeah, exactly. On our way back to the source, which is the reason we came here, to have the experience of these lower levels of creation, lower in terms of an experience in materiality. We get a little caught up, and we have these endless repetitions. I think science calls neural net addictions,
Yes.
that we're not unfolding the full potential of our brain. Some individuals have come along who have been in touch with, you say, true reality, and the expressions of that are the miracles, the healing, and so on. You know, the skill, though, is involved in not worshiping those miracles or those people, but in sort of buckling down to realize we have created our reality.
Mm-hmm.
Every drama that we have, we can't blame anyone except our own self.
Mm-hmm.
And now do we want a different experience?
Yes.
I mean, how do you think it's necessary to have these masters like Jesus Christ coming in? You know, he came to show us. Did he show us?
He did show us, and it's very necessary that we have these masters like Jesus Christ come. But the problem is, what does the person who follows Jesus make of what Jesus did? They tend to put him on a pedestal. Instead of becoming an ideal for us to imitate, he becomes an idol to worship. So therefore, the reason why Jesus came is frustrated at its very core, because he came to lead us and to show us what we could become. So if I'm going back, experiencing the 7 levels of creation, I will find that as a matter of natural happening, that things that are miraculous start to occur around me. That's normal. It's inevitable. It's rare. And unfortunately, it's made even more rare by the fact that when people do accomplish these things, they're also put on pedestals. And they're also worshipped. And people never get the message, that these miracles and these phenomena are not important.
So if you want to look as a scientist, you'd have one brain that's firing at fuller capacity, and the other brain that's watching it can actually give up and not fire at better capacity.
Yes, that's one of the great diseases of the mind, that anything that is powerful and unusual like that, we tend to isolate it in someone else that we worship.
But I know that you believe, nevertheless, that religion has within its, you say, why reinvent the wheel? Let's take the sacrament of the wine and communion. How could that sacrament remind an individual who is willing to take responsibility, who's willing to stop blaming, and wants to change, and wants to live the message, and wants eternal life? How could a moment in their day with this sacrament help them?
All the sacraments tell us about what life could be like if it were lived properly. They're the peak points. In modern psychology, the 7 sacraments are grouped around the 7 great passages of life: birth, death, marriage, etc. In the Eucharist, we go in and see how life should be lived, because we are all part of the one body. We are all children of God.
So the one body, Jesus says.
And that is symbolized in the bread and wine for us. And when we eat the bread and drink the wine, we are taking in the divine life, or elevating the divine life that's already there in us to a higher plane. But for most people, of course, the required preparation of the mind and the silence and the going within that's necessary for this to happen never takes place. They run up and get communion as if they were taking a tranquilizer or a vitamin pill, and that's it. So the whole of this wonderfully powerful system of religion which we have has all been trivialized and brought down to the lowest plane. And if a lot of people find it does nothing for them, I'm afraid I have to agree that they're right. It doesn't do anything for them, but the fault is not in the system, it's in the way the system has been trivialized.
Again, the symbolism of the wine and Jesus' blood. Jesus didn't die because we were sinners, did he?
He died to confront death and to show that it could be overcome by the power of the mind.
And so what is the symbol of him sharing his blood through the wine to you?
That everything that he did, he died to confront death and to show that it could be overcome by the power of the mind.
And so what is the symbol of him sharing his blood through the wine?
His very words are quoted in the Gospel of St. John. He said when we were praying, First of all, to believe that what we pray for has already been accomplished, and it will be so. We never think of that when we're advising people to pray. We're always asking God or Christ or someone else or a saint to grant me something which I do not have. That's the exact opposite of what Jesus said.
He says you have it.
It's already there.
It's already there.
Or it can't come to you, because what you're manifesting is the lack of it if you pray for it. If you're keeping in your mind it's already mine, then it will come. He also said in the same gospel that if you do what I'm saying, you will do all the wonders that I did and many more. But where do we hear that, or where do we see it? Nobody's doing it. But we should be doing it. And the fact that we're not doing it is a red warning sign that the message has been perverted.
But in the ancient schools of wisdom, they are doing it, aren't they? There are indications.
In the ancient schools of wisdom, yes, it was always done. Because the ancient schools of wisdom, I'm not very fond of the word ancient, because it sounds like it's something, in the New Age or something in the distance, and it's not here anymore. The ancient schools of wisdom were the schools that were in touch with the nature of reality. They knew where we had come from, what we were like in our nature here, and what we needed to do to return and elevate ourselves. And they taught that. It was eminent common sense and facts. And I don't like throwing a big cloak of mystery and obscurity and all that guruism that goes with it, because that again leads people to say, this is not for me, it's for those special people. And thereby they throw away their birthright. So the ancient schools of wisdom were schools of wisdom because they had true knowledge. So in the religions, when these were incorporated, gradually the wisdom became diminished and diluted, and the goals and the means of achieving the goals became altered and toned down time after time after time, so that the original purpose and the methods of attaining that destiny were lost sight of, and all we had were the formalizations of that, which followed.
To me, we're just about out of time, but one last question is, what would a person who is turned on by these ideas do?
Well, they should examine why their own religion isn't answering those needs and isn't teaching those ways of evolving. And perhaps they should go, I'm not saying to the local pastor or priest or whatever, because the likelihood is that they, in all sincerity, don't have those answers either. But the answers are there. And there are places in the world where those answers are prominent and defined. They're rare. Maybe there's only really one doing it at the present time, but the answers can be found there.
So in closing, we can say it's an esoteric principle to ask and you shall receive.
Ask and you shall receive, and the ancient wisdom, which is a contemporary wisdom as well and always will be yours.
Wonderful. I just wanted to recap with Father Miceal Ledwith, who's a Catholic priest, about some of his thoughts on his interview time with Swami Kaleshwar, who is a young Hindu accomplished master. What was your experience like?
Well, I had heard nothing about him until about a week or so before his arrival here, when you gave me the book and the video of what he had done. But I certainly was extremely impressed with what I read there and what I saw. Nobody's doing it, but we should be doing it. And the fact that we're not doing it is a red warning sign that the message has been perverted.
But in the ancient schools of wisdom, they are doing it, aren't they? There are indications.
In the ancient schools of wisdom, yes, it was always done. Because the ancient schools of wisdom, I'm not very fond of the word ancient, because it sounds like it's something, in the New Age or something in the distance, and it's not here anymore. The ancient schools of wisdom were the schools that were in touch with the nature of reality. They knew where we had come from, what we were like in our nature here, and what we needed to do to return and elevate ourselves. And they taught that. It was eminent common sense and facts. And I don't like throwing a big cloak of mystery and obscurity and all that guruism that goes with it, because that again leads people to say, this is not for me, it's for those special people. And thereby they throw away their birthright. So the ancient schools of wisdom were schools of wisdom because they had true knowledge. So in the religions, when these were incorporated, gradually the wisdom became diminished and diluted, and the goals and the means of achieving the goals became altered and toned down time after time after time, so that the original purpose and the methods of attaining that destiny were lost sight of, and all we had were the formalizations of that, which followed.
To me, we're just about out of time, but one last question is, what would a person who is turned on by these ideas do?
Well, they should examine why their own religion isn't answering those needs and isn't teaching those ways of evolving. And perhaps they should go, I'm not saying to the local pastor or priest or whatever, because the likelihood is that they, in all sincerity, don't have those answers either. But the answers are there. And there are places in the world where those answers are prominent and defined. They're rare. Maybe there's only really one doing it at the present time, but the answers can be found there. And
so in closing, we can say it's an esoteric principle to ask and you shall receive.
Ask and you shall receive, and the ancient wisdom, which is a contemporary wisdom as well and always will be yours.
Wonderful. I just wanted Father Miceal Ledwith, who's a Catholic.
The answers can be found there. And
so in closing, we can say it's an esoteric principle to ask and you shall receive.
Ask and you shall receive, and the ancient wisdom, which is a contemporary wisdom as well and always will be yours.
Wonderful. Joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here. Is something, a sort of little pericope or section of life in which the whole reason why we are here in this earth at all is to evolve and to become powerful spiritually. Is something, a sort of little pericope or section of life in which